Thanks, everyone, and appreciate you coming to this last session of the day, and very much appreciate being here today. So the title today obviously is Driving High Velocity Retention and Expansion, and what I'll be focusing on is some of the approaches and tactics that have taken over the last 10 years or so, working in multiple companies where we've been focusing on small as well as large customers at scale. So I'm currently an EIR at Matrix Partners, so they're on the board of HubSpot and Zendesk and a number of other companies. I'm also currently starting my own company called ChurnDog, which is a churn and retention management platform, an automated platform for that. I've previously been the CMO and COO of Autopilot, which is, we were focused on being the first marketing automation product that could grow in a self-service manner and enable our customers to build out complex journeys through the full customer lifecycle. And we were able to launch and get to the first 1,000 customers with only one high-velocity sales rep and one CSM, and then to 3,000 in about 2 years. So it grew very rapidly, leveraging some of the similar principles that I was using at both Zendesk and at CloudNet. And that's really about how do you understand and segment and set up the organization, and then build in the instrumentation so we can really deliver these highly personalized experiences at scale, as well as with our moderate and high customers. So a little background first, and I'll share a little bit of what I've learned, the metrics as well as some of the foundational elements, and then I'm going to jump into some actual examples and tactics that we've used. So first of all, what is high velocity to begin with? And it's not this very well-known name or acronym at the moment, but it's a go-to market strategy and a set of approaches that enables companies to be highly effective, and typically it's working from a self-service business early on. Companies like Google and Dropbox and Zendesk have been very successful here. It's what happens if you start off with a web-based sale and then over time advance into the mid-market. So Zendesk, New Relic, Box being good examples of companies that now serve very, very large customer deployments and at the same time are trying not to lose touch with the needs of the online base. It typically means you're solving a specific use case or set of use cases very effectively in broad horizontal markets, and that's how you're able to grow an organization to being public companies while still having very low average customer values, and that really happens through stratification. The alternative is the enterprise business model, which we're very well familiar with as well, Workday, NetSuite, Veeva being examples of this, where we're really identifying very deep needs with much more complex product strategies and much higher price points, and being very successful in solving the entire need of an organization, and then obviously working through implementation and service to support that. So one of the sort of the key attributes here is if you look at these companies and products on a sort of a price versus complexity spectrum, then this graveyard occurs where if you have an extremely complex product that's low price, that's when you start to see a lot of challenges occur. If you're doing prolonged implementations, a huge amount of professional services, and yet you're only charging $10,000 or $15,000 a year, that puts you in a position where your unit economics and your growth rates are really going to start to be impacted. So ensuring that you get this spectrum right from early on is sort of the first key element to being successful in the velocity model. Just some quick components, like what some of these differences between the successful velocity model versus the enterprise model. From an acquisition perspective, it's typically bottom-up versus top-down. In terms of how we drive demand and attract customers, in the velocity world, it's more typically inbound, organic, community-driven, versus in the enterprise, it's outbound sales, field marketing-driven. We leverage, free trials and one-to-many based approaches for acquisition as well as for new customer onboarding, and I'll go into this in a second. And then also on the enterprise side, it's more through proof of concepts, deep implementations, a lot of partner involvement, enablement, and then sales engineers through the whole process. And then on the post-sales side, more of the success engineering and ongoing consultation. So again, velocity is high volumes of low-paying customers, typically tens of thousands of customers versus hundreds to thousands in the enterprise model, with rapid deployment time and simple-to-use products that are well-connected and work within the ecosystems of companies that people like. Now, in both of these, I would argue that it needs to be easy to try, buy, and use, and your customers have to love them. It's two ways of coming at a different set of challenges that typically aligns with what the problem is you're trying to solve. So what are some of the key true north business KPIs? So the next element is, we all know what gets measured gets done, And so some of the three sort of key true north business KPIs, as I would call them, as it pertains to the business model and to velocity is, first of all, ARR, what percentage of my recurring revenue is growing each month? So having a good handle on trends and metric changes over time, and using that to be able to piece down into and layer into the organization as to what's driving ARR. And that, typically at Zendesk, we used to look at that from a self-service, from a one-to-many, and then by market segment, we would break down into all the drivers and the components of what increases our company's revenue growth over time, both for pre-sales and post-sales, and then we would implement different approaches to grow that over time. Now, as it pertains to this presentation around high velocity growth and retention, sort of the two things we're really looking at is net retention, so how much revenue sticks around during a specific period or cohort. So as the last speaker described, the average actually within the industry is about 101%, according to this year's Pacific Crest survey, which is managed by actually the Matrix Partners each year. Top performing companies are typically at 120, 130% plus. If you're below 100%, that's certainly an area to start to focus. The largest driver of net retention, it turns out, according to this McKinsey benchmark we've been looking at closely, is gross MRR churn as being a major driver of how you can impact net retention over time. And the third key true north business KPI is your CAC economics. So your lifetime value to customer acquisition cost ratio needs to be in excess of 3 at any given time. And focusing on how to improve your CAC over time is a key element to factor into how we're building out and structuring the organization. So those are some high-level principles. Let's go into some of the key, the specifics here and some tactics. So first of all, and this is, I'm sure, everybody in the room does this every day, but aligning the organization, the customer success teams, to maximize customer LTV potential is a key place to start. So this goes to some numbers on here I pulled actually again from a benchmark study, which is sourced on here, the McKinsey analysis, looking at 260 companies. It's a good link actually. It focuses mostly on customer success and how to invest. One of the interesting things is if you look at the velocity segment of their benchmark, which is SMB, and look at the mid-market segment and the enterprise segment. First of all, I pulled these ACVs here, but based on my experience at Autopilot, Zendesk, and others, it feels like you typically structure your self-service or your SMB customers around or below about $300 a month. At that point, there's no CSM management. We typically would have fake personas like Jennifer Hansen or Stacy Stinson, who would be the owner in Salesforce, and that customer base would be managed through a number of long-tail tactics and velocity approaches, which I'm going to go into shortly here. And that was actually an area of the business that I focused on and grew at Zendesk. Now, interestingly, we developed this concept of these scaled CSMs or junior CSMs who are thinking more in partnership with marketing, leveraging automation and data, and in doing so could manage very large numbers of customers. So in this study at McKinsey, they found that only about 0.18 CSMs would be allocated per million ARR. Another way of looking at that is a CSM within this high velocity segment can handle about 5.6 million ARR is typically on average, and that's through a combination of many different levers and approaches they're taking. Secondly, in the inside, we actually find that in the mid-market segments where you have typically a combination of self-service and enterprise direct, we actually see relatively lower quotas or revenue retention responsibilities within the CSMs. That's about 1.2 million per CSM. And at the direct or enterprise end, the typical enterprise in this study is averaging about 1.75 million ARR per CSM per year. So once we've structured for success, we have established what we call those swimming lanes. We operationalize that by assigning ownership or owner roles within Salesforce and map that through to our automation systems, whether that's marketing automation, into Tango, and so on. The next key thing is to align around first order and second order key retention goals. So most recently at Autopilot, our pricing model was such that as you add more contacts into your database, you would upgrade over time. And so our primary focus there was actually, like I always said, if we didn't churn, we grew. And so our main focus there was to ensure, but for both our velocity and our managed segments, that we maintain gross MRR churn. Now, the industry standard, according to the Pacific Crest Wave right now, is about 2.3% for SMB and mid-market companies. About 2.3% is your monthly gross MRR churn. My experience in recent, I ran a survey during my EIR period with a lot of companies in the Bay Area and asked, what is your average gross MRR churn? The number one segment or slice was companies who said we're churning more than 4% per month. So 34% of my companies in that survey said we're churning more than 4% per month. So what it tells us is that there's a lot more churn and retention. That's a common challenge we're all facing right now, and it's also one of the areas that I've decided to focus on for that reason. So one is aligning around your core retention goals, mapping that. Like our CSM team, we actually focused on maintaining, it wasn't always 2.0, but a percentage of gross MRR churn within all the combined accounts that the CSM team owned. And then in time, we moved to a per CSM allocation or quota to maintain below gross MRR churn. And then the velocity level, the numbers would always be higher, but there's more levers that can be pulled. So the second order metric that we'd look at would typically be some form of product engagement. So out of interest, a couple examples here we all are very familiar with would be a customer health score. You can determine and build into Tango, for example. Another might be monthly active users, which is a key metric that a lot of like Dropbox, for example, follows very closely. A third would be the Net Promoter Score that you're constantly sampling at the end of onboarding, at the end of the first year. So we would look at each of these and define at any given time which of the key product engagement scores would be our secondary order KPI that we'd be aligning around. So now I'm going to transition to it's great. So we have goals, we've got segmentation. Now what can we actually do about these numbers? And again, the title of this talk is about high velocity retention and expansion. So now I'm actually talking more specifically around how can you affect and use systems to drive down churn, increase expansion rates, and do so in a very scalable fashion. So there's many tactics and strategies that have been used over time, typically in collaboration between growth and customer success, and often with growth marketing involved. But one of the key ones that works without fail is through instrumenting your product usage and key events. It's codifying what we're already doing when we actually onboard our high-end customers. So defining graduation criteria, defining the aha moments that need to occur during that first onboarding phase once they've purchased, and now we want to get them up to being go live, fully deployed customers. Understanding those key events and then triggering both messages welcoming customers and nudging them towards taking those activities, as well as taking retention-based messages where if they haven't accomplished those within a period of time, we attempt to either email them to bring them back into the app or nudge them when they do go within, or nudge them when they do log in and maybe haven't added your product tracking code or added new users to the instance or set up your first role-based permission or shared your first file. So onboarding and nudging users to habitual use. There's a number of tools out there that make this far more easy to do today than it was in years past. But again, the key metric being focusing on what percentage of your trials become active or your new customers achieve the graduation criteria is a key first step that I would always start with. Again, there's a lot of tools that make this very possible to do today. Some great examples at Autopilot, the CEO would often pop up and say, we noticed you haven't added the tracking code. That for us was a key event. If you didn't add the tracking code, you couldn't measure events and website visits, which means you weren't unlocking the value of the platform. So we were constantly nudging users to try and achieve that particular event. LinkedIn has been very effective at, and you probably all in this room get notifications from LinkedIn, particularly if you're quite active, to join thought leaders or participate in a group or try out new features they're offering. The idea is to encourage your daily use and take advantage of features that you haven't currently activated on. And the third would be Headspace, the wellness app, the Mindspace app. They are very good once you sign up with keeping you moving on through their 10-course onboarding experience, which, and with each little message, add value and pull you back into the application. I'd like to show some numbers here, but unfortunately I don't have hard data on how the improvements can be, but I can give you as a sense. When we launched Autopilot, we wanted to have 40% of our customers active within our product, and initially we were well below that, and as we implemented more and more of these longer tail methods here with usage-based targeting, we were able to nudge that up much closer to our goal and fairly clearly over time. So a second key velocity method, and I think this is one of the core definitions of what makes these one-to-many business models, is it's using group programs and group demos, group training sessions as opposed to individual ones. So a lot of companies now will allow even the smallest customers, your SMB, your VSB, your low-paying customer tiers, to sign up for group demos where they can go through a 101, 102 training series. We did this at Autopilot very effectively. We were able to invite customers through an in-app notification to schedule time on either a GoToWebinar or a Calendly event, and in sort of Genius Bar style, invite themselves into a group demo where our CSM responsible for that segment would be thinking about how she could evolve the onboarding and training to meet the needs of not 1 or 2 questions, but maybe 5 or 10 sets of customers requesting similar onboarding experiences. An interesting point that I've seen is usually about half of individual requests for individual training, individual demos will be fully answered and fully resolved with a group-based experience, and the follow-ups that come out of that are much more scalable and tend to be much more, the average time to complete on either the tickets or the requests that come out of that tend to be much closer because you're dealing with an educated audience at that point. And you're delivering this customized experience and more personal experience at scale. A third very effective tactic is taking an asset registry of all the different training and enablement content that you have, whether it's in your help center, if you've actually got an academy you've built out. This is an example at Segment.com, their analytics academy. If you ever sign up and enroll for their service, you'll start receiving notifications calling you back in. So at Autopilot, we developed these things called email courses, and we would distill each of the different sections of all our different content and deliver that up in a drip series of email content delivered to our customers, curated by our teams, and we could actually start to specialize this for our B2B versus our B2C customers. So email courses can be a terrific way if you don't have everything, and this is almost every company, if you don't have all the resources you want your customers to ensure they see in one particular location, an email course can be a highly effective way. Typical open rates on these types of emails are going to be north of 50%. With click rates, it'll be 20, 30, 40%, which is like 3 to 5x higher than typical numbers in your standard marketing email. A fourth key strategy for retention and expansion in velocity or high value, in high volume businesses is obviously variable pricing that starts in a low manner with low friction and aligns the value the customer pays with the value you're delivering to the organization. Companies that achieve this and are successful here, it's a beautiful thing to see because you're able to really expand well, not get pushback on value points. There's always going to be that awkward sort of $450 to $850 per month jump, whatever your company's particular value is there. There's going to be some friction points along there that you'll identify and start to look at how we can ensure that when we get to those dangerous points that we, in advance, move people onto annual plans and proactively reach out to them, particularly if they're low usage. But in general, developing some sort of secondary access to your pricing tiers that aligns usage with the actual plan level that they're on is a critical way to grow and reduce that sort of expansion friction over time. A fifth, I don't know if I'd call this a tactic since it's a lot of work, but we think a lot about the onboarding of our customers, both when they first try or sign up for your product, as well as when we first implement them during that 90-day onboarding or 180-day onboarding, whatever your particular business is. An area that we often, that sort of gets thrown out in the wash is the offboarding of a customer. What happens when they actually want to leave? So obviously the primary goal is be well ahead of this, manage them carefully, and drive retention through best practices and implementation over time. But in the long tail base, you obviously don't have that luxury. You can't work with 10,000 customers. So one method that Facebook first implemented years ago was to create this offboarding experience that celebrates past successes, like your 628 friends, what's going to happen with them, creating deflection approaches, like Chris is going to, Chris will miss you, Brandon will miss you, and then also capturing reasons for canceling. So you can go click deactivate right now on Facebook, you'll see this screen pop up. They also offer ways to try and remediate that situation. So for example, I think it says if I get too many emails or invitations, if you select that, they say, did you know you can manage your emails from the Preferences Center? Click here to go do this now. So this is actually an area, and like productizing some of this is a lot of what I'm working on right now in my company in ChurnDog. But I've implemented this twice over the years and found that we can typically drive down about 10 to 20% of gross MRR churn with a successful offboarding experience, particularly as you start to integrate into your different touch points, whether that's the ways in which you email, interact customers, and live chat, for example. The sixth is committing to systematic improvement. So another benefit of an offboarding where you categorize and capture the reasons for cancel is instead of sending an email to somebody after they've canceled saying, would you mind filling out my SurveyMonkey or whatever your particular service is you're using to tell us why you're leaving, which typically gets about a 1% response rate. You can instead capture and categorize all the reasons why people cancel over time. This methodology is something that's hard to do, but if you get the instrumentation in place, to give you a sense, like at Zendesk, when we had a competitor who introduced extremely low cost like pricing, we were able to measure pricing pressures increasing substantially over time, and it actually helped us understand how much we needed to adjust our pricing by within that segment in order to overcome some of the pricing-related competition we were facing. At Autopilot, this also helped us determine when is that difficult time from a product perspective when you gotta stop innovating and do some back-end refactoring and improve because performance and speed is enough of an issue that's driving up churn. And if we didn't have sort of systematic, clear data and trending over time, then to make those kinds of decisions gets very, very difficult. A seventh key strategy has been very successful. I was speaking with someone who used to be at Intuit, and Intuit set up a live chat desk where they would route customers who were leaving who had never figured out how to use the product or weren't getting value anymore or pricing had changed and they were unhappy about it, but they didn't really want to give up. And that's one of the top reasons why people leave companies is, they never got onboarded properly to begin with. So in a scenario where you can identify those customers that are paying a threshold where it makes sense to engage, and they may be offboarding for reasons that they don't really want to. Poor onboarding, couldn't figure it out, pricing changed and frustrated, internal needs changed, executive champion moved, or so on. Routing to a live chat desk, whether that's one of the main chat tools or your own product, where you can engage customers selectively, can be a highly effective way to save 15 to 30% of those particular cancellations. I was speaking to a well-known SaaS company recently that would do this when they changed pricing, and they found that when people exceeded $800 a month, so pricing sort of went up dramatically in a period of a few months, they found that at that segment, if they immediately routed those customers who were trying to exit to a chat-based platform where they were able to extend their plan, they gave them an immediate 50% discount, extended them to annual, and then re-onboarded them. And they were able to drive the MRR churn in that segment, which is a big portion of the business, from north of 10% to under 3%. So really substantial areas you can have some impact there and do so in a way that scales through some branching and some logic. And a nice sort of positive, easy tactic is to take the NPS score one step further. So typically customers who really love your product, your promoters, are willing to go online and review you, whether it's on G2 Crowd or Yelp or GetApp or whichever place your company has presence. So this can be automated if you pull this into your automation system or right from within Tatango. Immediately ask them, follow up with that. Thank you for reviewing us. Thank you for giving us a positive review. Would you mind quickly reviewing us and like A/B/C test it between each of those different review platforms? And it's a great way to build up online reviews and references, which not only benefits with existing customers, it's also a great way to help get found or help convert customers who are currently in a sales process. So in summary, avoid the SaaS graveyard. That's beyond a tactic. That's more, you hope you have that right from the begin with. It's one of the things I look at companies early on is how are we positioned within the landscape and how are our go-to-market tactics relative to the service that we're offering. Second is align around your key goals, your North Star KPIs, as well as these operational goals, so that everyone in the organization knows what are our primary ARR goals, what are our primary activation goals, what are our primary churn and retention goals, and in doing so, keep the company focused in the same direction. Third is design success coverage to maximize customer LTV potential. So focus on our largest customers who need full-blown, our typical onboarding and ongoing account management process. And then on the low end, use scaled tactics through a combination of triggering and data as well as automation to enable a highly leveraged approach that could include usage-triggered approaches, improved personalization, group-based demos and training, low-friction pricing, and digital experiences that span through the life cycle. And if you do this well, it's very, very possible to take the best practice, and I think this is one of the fun parts organizationally and sort of with customers, is to take that experience that we have optimized and really built with our largest customers and then roll that out at mass scale to affect tens of thousands of other companies. And I think that That's absolutely a great target to go for and goal to go for. And more importantly, it does increase net retention. It does increase your efficiency metrics, which makes the company much more valuable. So just a little piece on what I've been working on. It's a beautifully simple digital engagement platform, integrates with systems, and has a system of intelligence to help power that. And obviously showing that I actually believe so strongly in this area that I think there's actually a way to sort of make that a whole lot easier. And with that, I'm going to end and say thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Guy.
Yeah.
So we're at the end of the time, but are you able to take a couple of questions for a couple of minutes?
Sure.
The next session starts at 3 o'clock, which is in about 8 minutes time downstairs. So we'll just take a couple of questions and then give you guys time to head down. So question at the back there. Let me come over to the mic. So let me give you the mic.
Thanks for the presentation. That was great. You had a slide on there that talked about focusing on value and not features, and then below it said 130% net retention rate. Can you describe that a little bit more on what you were talking about?
Yeah, thanks. That was actually the first year average net retention we were having. That was actually very specific to Autopilot, so I probably should have clarified that. We were seeing first year net retention of 130%, and we measured it at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. And that's because our gross MRR churn was actually fairly decent. It was actually quite high, but we had this really high expansion piece because customers would come on with very small initial account values, and then as they became more successful, added contacts, they grew quite rapidly. Yep.
You had a slide about batch webinars.
Yes.
My question, I don't know, the problem we have in our company, we are SMB and mid-market, and we've tried group webinars for new customers onboarding, here's the time, guys, come on.
No one comes.
Nobody comes.
Yeah.
And then, it's a waste of time, a waste of effort. But then in the end, all those customers do need some sort of degree of onboarding, but it's not scalable because, they're SMBs. I mean, I cannot have as many.
Yeah, there's not an easy
CSMs.
answer there. I think it's, you're absolutely right. Like if you don't get people in, so what we started to do is include it in in-app messaging, email messaging throughout the course of, from they were first welcome to the service, and then every email that we sent to them. We included at the bottom of newsletters, we included it in the bottom of all the emails that were coming out from our CSMs during that period, and we just had a big focus on driving people into that group webinar. And obviously, I think that you need to probably have thousands of customers and be onboarding a couple hundred a month or so, or 100 a month before it really starts to get to a meaningful number. Because I think probably on average, I would say maybe 5% or 10% of companies that you send that you in would be a good, like 5 to 10%, I'd say, is really reasonable to expect would actually attend these. So if the numbers are lower than that, then Calendly is probably your next best bet, and then third is actually reaching out, and then you'd have to be more segmented about that.